After 25 years behind the decks, I've learned that every DJ has a unique path. I'm DJ Deckard. Welcome to A DJ's Journey, a podcast that explores the stories behind the music with the DJs who shaped our scene. Norman Cook once called today's guest amiable but useless. That guest turned around and gave Norman his record label. I'm Deckard. This is The DJ's Journey with Skint Records founder Damien Harris, also known as Midfield General. All right, welcome to another DJ's Journey. My name is Deckard, and today I am here with Skint Records founder Damien Harris, aka Midfield General. Hello again, Damien.
Hello. Sorry, I couldn't. I raised my hand, but I couldn't actually see it in the shot, so I'm not sure whether you saw it. Hello. Nice to see you again.
So for people who maybe don't know Skint Records, I'm sure they've heard the records, they've heard yours or Fat Boys or many other artists, especially big back in the Big Beat days. So for framing, I'm going to play a clip from the episode with Norman Cook, who this episode is not out yet, so nobody's heard this clip. So We'll start from here, and I'm going to get your reaction in real time.
Okay.
I mean, Fatboy Slim was Damien's idea. Do you know that?
I did not know that.
He was working for Loaded Records, which was the house label that Pete Span was on. But we were all mates, and he was like the office boy, and he was shit. He was terrible. He just used to get stoned at lunchtime and then not get any work done in the afternoon. So my friends who owned the label, one day they said, "Look, we've got to sack Damien. Are you all right with that?" I was like, "Yeah, you're right. I love him, but he's shit. So he's got to go." So about a week later, I said, "How did it go sacking Damien?" They went, "I don't know what happened. We called him in to sack him, and we ended up giving him his own label." We summoned him in to sack him, and he said, "Oh, I'm glad you called me in because I've got this great idea for a label. You know those sets that Norman's been playing that aren't house, but they're not hip hop and they're not trip hop." And he said, "I feel there's something going, and we should have a label that looks at that kind of music." And they went, "Actually, that sounds interesting." And then so he came to me and he said, "You know that music you've been playing in your sets? Make music that's all mixed around like that. You know, don't jump between genres. Actually, put them all in one record." And I've got this label called Skint. They've just given me my own label called Skint, and we want you to be the first release. So make a record like this. So he A&R'd me into becoming Fatboy Slim. So, and he designed the logo, and yeah, he's an absolute linchpin, great raconteur, and a very funny man.
Oh, bastard. Bless him.
But it's quite complimentary as well.
Amiable but useless was the slightly nicer way when I tell that story. Yeah, it's all true. I do sometimes look back and go, I wish I could remember that conversation and what sort of magic I performed to get myself out of that spot and get them to give me a label. Yeah, what a touch.
All right. So we'll get back up to there, but we're going to go back to the beginning.
Okay.
And maybe you can verify or not, but Norman described your story as starting with punk and then hip hop and then acid house, and then that's what kind of fed into Big Beat. But so maybe walk me through that. What was the first music that really grabbed you that you can remember?
Well, so I'm the youngest of five by quite a long way. So when I was so when it was 1977, when punk was happening, I was 6, 7, 8, around that age. And my brothers were in a punk band called The Ignorance. And my eldest brother, Christopher, used to listen to John Peel all the time. So incredibly lucky to have be surrounded by music. They were always buying new stuff, always sort of slightly different, left of center. And so and it was a great time to it was a very exciting time. Just as I was starting to take it in, sort of punk that was happening. I remember them coming back from the Ramones. They all went to see the Ramones play in London in sort of like 1976, and so just all very vivid memories of that. And then, of course, I got into listening to John Peel as well. John played my brother's band's record, and I remember like waking up, my brother just going crazy in the house because John Peel was playing his record.
That's
And
huge.
it was a late night show. So it was sort of like 10. Yeah. It was 10 till 12. So we was sort of like grew up in that sort of position. And then the first thing that I felt was mine was through The Clash and The Clash's work with Futura 2000. I sort of started to get into hip hop and sort of discovered that through that little route.
How old were you? How old were you at that time?
So that would have been sort of when did Combat Rock come out? Combat Rock this was sort of 81, 2, 3. I remember sort of seeing the art first, and graffiti art really appealed to me. And there was a book called Subway Art, which was huge over here in England. And then a film by Style Wars,
Oh, yeah.
which is a film about graffiti by Henry Chalfont. And so that imagery, that very early imagery that was coming over, so it must have been, trying to think when sort of like Buffalo Girls was probably 82, around then. So
Malcolm McLaren, right?
Yeah, so it was just really intriguing, and loved those Sugar Hill Gang records. Yeah, so hip hop was first thing that was sort of mine that my brothers didn't quite understand, which was always quite nice. Yeah, and then learned how to play guitar and drums, and then tried sort of being in bands. And then when DJing came along, none of my friends were any good at being in bands. So I kind of got into DJing because it was a lot easier and you could do it on your own. You didn't have to rely on anyone else. Yeah.
I had a very similar thought about that too. It's a lot easier to take your headphones and music than it is to have 4 or 5 people in a band.
Yes, exactly. But also another thing was, so I used to, again, because of my brothers and all their friends were that bit older, I was the fifth one. And by the time your parents get to the fifth one, they don't really give a shit. It's like, yeah, you want to go juggle some knives? Sure. Yeah, go on. You'll be fine. And yeah, so I used to sort of go to the pub my brothers went to and go to parties. And because I felt so I still felt weird sort of at 15, 16, talking to sort of proper students. So I used to start playing records there. And so I would go to parties and play records. There was a DJ called John Da Silva, who used to play at the Hacienda. He, pre-Hacienda, lived in Whitstable. And so he taught me a lot about DJing. So used to do sort of student squat parties, and yeah.
Do you remember the first records you bought? Were they, was it hip hop, or were you getting into was Acid House down the road from when you started?
No, Acid House was way down the road yet. My first actual record was Oliver's Army by Elvis Costello. There's a big horse race in England called the Grand National, and I had won some money on the Grand National, and I went and bought Oliver's Army by Elvis Costello. I then worked in record shops. Around 15, I started working in our local record shop in Canterbury. So I was very soon into that, consuming music and sort of selling it as well, and sort of starting to collect things. And I guess Rare Groove was the sort of dominant thing at that time. This was just before, or just as acid house was coming in and house music was coming in. So that would have been 85, 86, 87. And getting excited about, Across the Tracks and sort of lots of that James Brown. The Rare Groove, we called it in the UK.
Yeah. And
that was, sorry, go on.
I say that, is that when and then you moved to Brighton to study art? Is that right?
I was 19 when I moved to Brighton. I had started DJing quite a bit at local clubs. There was only, I say clubs, there was only one in Canterbury. And I used to do the student night, which was the only night you could get in without wearing smart shoes in the whole of Canterbury. So we used to do that. All the other DJs could never understand why I didn't talk, and they were like, why aren't you saying stuff? And so they would send up requests and say, would the person with the yellow Ford Cortina please move it as it's causing? And they would send up things like that just to sort of take the mickey out of me. And then, just while I remember, this was quite a good story. We sort of planned to do the first acid house night in Whitstable, Canterbury, and we were doing it at the Art College, and we had sort of we hadn't been to one. Me and my friend hadn't actually been to one, but we just read about it and we knew some of the records. And so we put on this night, and that was going to be in November. And then suddenly in October, I was serving in the record shop, and the sort of cheesy local DJ said, "Oh, you got some of that acid house shit? I've got to do a night." And it was like, what? And Studio 3 put on an acid house night, and it broke my heart because we couldn't say that we were going to do it properly. And so that's a little window into pre-Art College days.
And then when you were studying art, did you have a direction in mind at that point?
I always thought I was doing a very pretentious fine art course in Brighton, and the plan is that I would do an MA in illustration. MA is a sort of an advanced course, and go to Central St Martin's, which was in sort of Covent Garden in London, and then I would get a job at the Face. And that was always what I did. I couldn't really look beyond that. I had started doing record covers. I did the Beats International cover for Norman. So I'd started to get into that. So it was, I always thought I would be a graphic designer. That was going to be what I was going to do.
And music was just going to be like a passion or something you did just because you loved it?
But that, this is the thing. There wasn't, as career options go, DJ was never one that you would go, what, you could actually get paid for that. So it wasn't really, I had like music. I'd sort of been in studios. So if the opportunity came along, one of the great things I think about the time I was in was that samplers came along, and suddenly that ability to go in on your own and make something presented itself to me. So that wasn't really probably in, between 16 and 22, they weren't really options. And then by the time I had sort of left college and got a job with Loaded, because they had a studio, they had a studio set up, like an S1000 and an Atari. So it was only then that I sort of started playing around with music.
And so before you were at Loaded, were you at Rounded Record Store? Is that where you met Norman?
Yeah. So people often say that maybe this is where Norm thinks I'm a raconteur. I planned getting that job quite thoroughly. So I had worked in the shop in Brighton. So Brighton and Whitstable, Canterbury is like about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from each other. I knew that when I got to Brighton, I wanted a job in a record shop because it is the perfect place to meet everyone, to sort of immerse yourself into, a scene. I'd look back and go, that was quite calculated of me, which is not something many people accuse me of. But that move to sort of like to get my feet behind the counter, so to speak, was quite calculated. And we used to have reps from record companies that would visit, and many would cover the southeast of the England. So many who did Canterbury also did Brighton. And so in the summer before I went, I got them to take me on a day out. About 3 of them brought me on the day trip and took me to Brighton, and I got to meet everyone in the shop. So I was setting the ground early on. Yeah. And so within about 2 months, 3 months, I had sort of got the job. So yeah, it was quite a power move actually, which is something, I'm not really known for.
Well strategized, well planned out.
Thank you. Thank you.
And people maybe in the US who haven't really heard about Brighton that much. I've only, lately I watched the documentary that came out right here, right now that really went into depth about Big Beach Boutique and showed more of Brighton than I had personally seen.
Yeah.
What was Brighton like at the time, musically or clubs? Because it seems like it's a little outpost in England for music and clubs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the easiest assumption, and I can hear a cat meowing. One sec, just before I answer. So Brighton is very liberal. It was a liberal little bubble in conservative country. So yeah, so that's kind of what Brighton was like.
Right.
If you get the
and
idea.
then Yeah. And I think in towns like that, like in San Francisco, there's a what's the word? It's just part of the fabric of San Francisco. I think if you don't enjoy it, it's not the town for you. But if you really enjoy that, you're going to get so many different types of art and music, and then you can really bask in it and enjoy that you're different parts of town. You might have completely different kind of bars or clubs but all the options are really available there. So when you and Norman met, and you ended up being his flatmate, right?
Not quite his tenant.
His tenant. Okay.
He was my evil landlord for quite a few years. But not that evil, because basically he was a rubbish landlord, only in the fact that he forgot to ask me for the money. And so I would just not forget, or it would be more convenient not to pay him his rent. And so, yeah, we got to a point where I owed him a fair bit. And it was like, oh, right, I should really. And that's, yeah. So, but he had a house that was his old fan club as well. So when he was in Beats International, and so we used to get Beats International fan letters arriving at the house. And I was in that place for quite a while, about 6 years, I think.
And you said you did art for one of the Beats International albums?
Yes.
Or records?
Sun Doesn't Shine. It's got sun in the title. Definitely got that. I think, that's The Sun Doesn't Shine, I think it is. So second album. And that was in the days before, like, you did everything digitally. So I sort of had to draw it up and then get it sort of done properly on that sort of old artwork. Yeah, for older listeners might find that vaguely interesting, but anyone under 50 probably won't. Yeah.
I have both those Beats International records.
Okay.
And for me, I was still trying to figure out, the UK music to me, especially at that time, was so interesting because it was so different than what I was hearing from America and the influences. And even I talked to Norman about it with Dub Be Good to Me. Because I don't know, it felt so fresh, even though it was, sampling The Clash and I forget the other sample in there, but but something about it was definitely portending kind of a new future with music.
Yeah.
So, and he was recording as Pizza Man at the time. So, was kind of going back to the clip we first played. How did
Yeah.
we get from, you working at the record store and you're working at Loaded Records as well at that time? Did they both cross
No,
over?
no. So I think it must be 93, early 93. I was working in another record shop. I was doing some writing for DJ Magazine. And I was DJing quite a lot in clubs in town. And I got asked by Tim and JC, who ran Loaded, if I would work for them, because Roger Wildchild Mackenzie, he had been making music and his music had sort of got to a stage that he could leave the job. So his job came available, and so I took it. So that all happened in early 93, and so hence that was me starting at Loaded.
Nice.
And they had just started doing Pizza Man as well. But also the sort of the House of Love had begun, and that's a very key component to this whole story.
Tell me more.
Okay. So Norm had some sort of like some slightly difficult times. His marriage sort of broke up with his wife, and he was sort of like finding it a bit difficult, was a bit unsure where he was. I think he would be fair to say that. And sometimes when you're in that stage, music doesn't come quite as easily to you. And then he had a road to Damascus experience, and he took ecstasy for the first time, which was something he hadn't really been into, and it did really change him. And he just just opened his eyes to a lot of music. Well, probably opened his ears to a lot of different music. He certainly got a bit more sort of psychedelic, and he started making house records, and he started making Pizza Man. He started doing Mighty Dubcats. And so it just sort of took him a while to get that stuff, I think.
Mhm.
And when it finally sort of did, and there was a famous one, he went to see Richie Hawtin play in Bristol, and I'm fairly sure it's Richie Hawtin. But yeah, it sort of really changed his life and opened him up musically. And so we then started to end up going back to Norman's on a Saturday night. And there was a sort of smallish group of us that would always end up there. We'd usually been at clubs, either DJing. I used to play at the Zap Club. He was usually at the Escape Club, which is about a mile down the road. So there was a group of about 10, 15 of us that would always end up there, and then sometimes that would sort of gradually increase. And we would just sort of party and listen to his record collection, and play records. Yeah, and it was really, really good fun, and it was quite an experience for all of us, and probably went on for a couple of years. And so, there's a few things. So I always remember "Creep" by Radiohead. We
Mm.
used to play that a lot, and of course, "Smells Like Teen Spirit" was around at the time as well, and that I always felt that loud, quiet, loud
Yeah.
element was always sort of quite fed into sort of what Big Beat became, and sort of Norma's that sort of impact. And we used to play those records, just sort of weird, but Norma's record collection was great, and you could find these strange sort of psychedelic records, and bits of hip hop, bits of house. So it was, wanted to avoid saying melting pot, but it kind of became this pot in which many different elements of what Skint would become and what the Big Beat Boutique came.
Right. So Norman, he's just, I've heard him use this in other interviews as well, but he called it the 4-ingredient recipe for Big Beat. Pop hooks of the Beatles mixed with the attitude and DIY spirit of punk rock, then mixed with the break beats of hip hop and funk that I'd always loved with the energy of acid house. That was the Fatboy Slim blueprint. But he said in my conversation with him that you were a big help in also kind of fusing those together. I think the way that he described it, again, going back to the formation of Skint Records, if I'm recalling correctly, he made it sound like, so those elements you guys were already playing around with, but at least the way that he said it, he hadn't thought about fusing them all together and really having that be its own thing. It was just like you said, you were playing different records together and enjoying them all.
Yeah, he's being slightly modest because he was in Freak Power at the time, and he did he did something called the Fried Funk Food EP, and he did 2 volumes of it, and they were brilliant. And at the time, my DJing, I used to do the warm up for the Cocoa Club, which is sort of like the biggest club night in Brighton. So I would have about nearly a couple of hours to play from, and I would play from like the beginning when people are walking in. So you play reggae and sort of soul and dub and things like that. And then you're gradually building, and you're always on the lookout for these records around 110, between 105 to sort of like 115. And then you could play things like Wax the Van and like Lola and that sort of Arthur Russell-y kind of disco, but slightly punky disco. So you're always on the search for records of that ilk. And if they mixed a bit of hip hop in, brilliant. Norm made a couple of those on these Fried Funk Food EPs, and they were superb. And he would often he was so prolific at the time, he would often just knock out here's this little B-side thing that I did that just had an acid line and a hip hop break. And you go, oh my God, that's amazing. So he had kind of shown me what he could do, and it helped just solidify that image for me in my head of like, well, what this should be. But also Tom and Ed Chemical, who I had known back in the day, they had started to do that. So Song for the Siren was some of those Weatherall mixes, like his James Come Home mix, and what's the other one? My Bloody Valentine. So that there were a few people mixing breakbeats and acid house and club elements. So it was there. And I just
Chemical Brothers it was at the Heavenly Social days.
Yeah. So I can never quite remember whether that's 93. I think it was 90, maybe 94. They started the Social. I never went to the first one, which still annoys me because I was always working. Yeah, that was quite a big turning point for Norm as well. Going and hearing that Tom and Ed were playing sort of Santa Cruz and so that he loved the fact that they were playing his records, and we sort of Norm went up and met everyone, and it was like, oh, okay. And they had sort of got the memo too. Just a sort of a little bit of history sort of that's a bit important. Around 92, 93 was the first time as superstar DJs and the sort of deifying of DJs. As there was a famous, Sasha on the cover of Mixmag, I think, as is God a DJ, or something very early 90s cocaine-y idea. And so this idea that clubbing was meant to be glamorous and silky and smooth and all those things, to some people that wasn't so much fun. So you're reacting to that by going, well, let's play in a grotty pub or in the basement of a club, in the case of the Social. And with us at the Boutique was like, let's do it here, because it's the exact opposite of big super clubs with linen hanging down and things like that. So that was quite important as well.
So speaking of history,
Yeah.
tell me if I have this wrong, but coincidentally, here's what I have as today in history. On April 24th, 1993, Skint Records was co-founded by Damien Harris and Brighton. Today, on this very day in 1993. Is that
Really?
correct? Yes. This is what I came up with in my history.
Wow. Possibly. I tell you why. So we actually put out the first record in 94, but we had test pressings of Santa Cruz a long time before, which could very well have been the day we got Santa Cruz and The Weekend Starts Here cut. So that might be where that comes from, because when they gave me the label and said it's okay to do the label, we had the infrastructure. We had accounts with pressing plants and all those things. So, and contacts with all the distributors. So that was all there. But Tim, who was one of the partners, he said, make sure you get your first 3 releases, because you want to don't do one and then 6 months later, oh, here's another one.
Yeah.
Just do a good run of them. And he says, I think that's really important. And it was. So we waited a little while. So it could, if it is 24th of April, that's quite nuts.
Yeah, quite a coincidence. So
yeah. So 33 years ago. Bloody hell.
Quite cool though.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that moment. You said you couldn't quite remember the conversation. That you walk away. You go from being on the way out to now you have your own label.
Yeah.
How did it come about? Still to this day, great song.
Yeah.
Norman's whole that album, that first Fatboy Slim record, I still just absolute bangers. Love it.
Mm.
You obviously, like you were saying, these elements were in the air. How did you now go from being, an employee loaded to now you've got to make the decisions and put on this hat of now I'm A&R and I'm so what did that look like for you? What did life turn, being on the other side all of a sudden going, now you've got responsibilities?
Yeah. I have never worked so hard in my life. The moment when they said, all right, you can have a label. And so it's interesting. And I kind of had a little bit of it with Vicious Charm as well. It's like, there's just so much I wanted to do, so many years of following record labels, there's a logo to design, God damn it. That is the stuff. That's my first thing, and going, right, well, what are the house bags going to look like? What's the sleeves going to look like? So all those things, it came very naturally, all of that side of things. I mean, I was lucky in that JC Reed, who is our friend, and he had the business skills. He sort of wrote the checks and things like that. So I was very lucky to have that side of the business covered, because I'm useless at it, as I'm discovering as with my own label. It's it's always, I still get people ask me today and they say, so what's the dealer price on that? And I'm just like, I don't know, probably just enough, so I was never the business that sort of inspired me. It was always just making sure everything was really good. So that came relatively easy. And in terms of, and then, so I was either making music or listening to music that I was going to put out, or things like that. So obviously myself as midfield general, this is the other thing. I never wanted anyone to have to A&R me. I didn't want that rejection. So I set up my own label. And so, I was doing my own midfield general records then as well. And we were DJing more and more. So it was going on.
You Sorry, I just want to jump back to something you said earlier too. You mentioned having the 3 releases lined up. So you were testing out Santa Cruz, which I believe sold pretty well as a first release. What did you have lined up? Do you remember for the second and third release?
Yeah, so the second release was Arthur, which was a Brighton band, which I did a remix of. So they were sort of a slightly baggy Brighton band. And yeah, I did one of my first ever remixes for them, which was a sort of bit of a rip-off of early Chems type, big breakbeat, chuggy sort of type thing. So that was second. And then the third one was Hip Hoptimist. And that was Andy Barlow, who went on to be Lamb. And the track was called Anna Faye. And it had some sort of vague Mo Wax. There was some vague Mo Wax connections there as well. Yeah, so those are the first 3. And then I'm 4 with Worlds and Bung. So yeah, so that was the first 4.
You mentioned in our crate digging interview we did, if I get it right, you said you would listen to a song, and if it lasted past like 3 days, like if you got to day 4 and you still love the track, then it was like something to consider. Is that, did that hold true at that time? Did you already have that idea about how you were going to be deciding who to take on, what tracks to sign or artists to sign?
Was never, that was more something that I noticed later on.
Mm-hmm.
But you really have to question, how much do I love this record, or how much do I want to sort of get involved and commit to releasing and commit to having these people as artists? Do I get on with them? All things that you have to consider. So no, it all felt very instinctive that early couple of years. It was all instinct. I don't know whether we talked about the Low Fidelity All Stars. I knew 2 or 3 minutes in that I wanted to sign them, and just because there was something about them that I had loved. I went to see them in the Dublin Castle, which is a pub in Camden, which has quite a name for. It was like that was where you played. And that's where all the A&R men would go. So if you could get a gig at the Dublin Castle and there was a bit of excitement about you as a band, you would get a lot of people in there. And so it was often seen as quite a coup to get in there. And yeah, I went to see the Lo-Fis in there, and there was all of the sort of major A&R people were there. And yeah, I just knew. And maybe it was sort of like because we were still at an early time and it was still all exciting, and I didn't have to think about, marketing budgets or what are they going to do here. I just knew I loved it. So instinct is very much has to be there, because if you get doubts, and I've had this before, there's records that you get and that you've got doubts about, that's not good. And you're suddenly going, well, I'm not sure this is right. And that has happened to me before, and it's a very hard one to get out of.
Well,
I'm not going to tell you any of them. I can see your face. There you go.
Well,
but no.
I want to go back because you mentioned Lo-Fi All Stars, and it was almost like the one that really could have been, and not that they didn't still stick around, but you mentioned that I think one of the members broke off shortly after one of those first gigs. And you kind of mentioned almost being like a little, maybe a mixture of frustration and sadness that They didn't
Mm.
they didn't quite get to where they could have, or the promise that you saw.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was actually after there's all these sort of points where, you know, in a band's career, and funnily enough, playing at the Dublin Castle is sort of one of those, you know, and then someone writing about you in the NME or Melody Maker. And the Low Fidelity All Stars, we had covers on NME and Melody Maker, and they had just played at the Astoria, which is a big sort of 3,000 venue in London, which again was one of those sort of notches that you go, right, if we can get there. Next is playing at Glastonbury, which they did as well. But he left just after they'd played at the Astoria, just before America took notice with Battle Flag, which still sounds brilliant today.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress.
It is.
Sorry.
Yes. So the Big Beat Boutique ends up at the Concord.
Yes.
What's the origin of coming up with the name Big Beat? Was that from you? Was that where did it come from? And was that term, did the club name it, or was the kind of genre name first and then the club name?
No. So I had always put on clubs, but with people who were as bad at selling themselves as I was. So they rarely did very well. And then we met Gareth Hanson, who was Norman's friend and who, a friend of all of ours, really. And he was looking to do a club, and he helped me. So we joined forces, and he started promoting these nights. He had been to the Heavenly Social, you know, he had sort of been hanging out with Oasis and what have you. So he was just really good at selling, and he was a salesman and was happy to go and stand outside clubs and give them flyers and tell them, you have to come to this night. We had been trying to find a name for it for a while. One name we were going to go with was Kung Fu Gym Jams, which is pajamas, which is the night attire for nighttime. And that kind of fit into a sort of, that sort of cheeky seaside, slightly ironic idea. There have been a lot of clubs previously in the sort of like Balearic network that had that sort of saucy seaside humor, and sort of slightly surreal humor. So so that fitted in with that, and we were getting there. And then we were obviously, maybe a couple of people going, I'm not sure, sounds a bit silly. And then Gareth saw a poster, or he came up with the name. He said, what about the Big Beat Boutique? And there had been, I think, maybe a 60s something. I want to say a film, but I don't think it was a film. But yeah, and he had seen something and it said the Big Beat Boutique, and it was like, yeah, that sounds great. We didn't make the connection. We didn't name Big Beat, because did I mention I'd been a journalist as well? I'd also been doing some journalism
for the DJ Mag or
DJ Magazine, and I did a bit for ID. And so I had to do sort of writing about clubs, and that idea of there's a scene that has been identified, but no one quite knows what to call it. So trip hop, for example, which I know everyone who was involved with trip hop did at the time, didn't like it, but
didn't like the label,
didn't like the name. Yeah. And you go, but because if you say, well, it's sort of like down tempo, and it's sort of got these sci-fi, you know, these sort of quirky cinematic references, and it's a word soup. And then someone says trip hop, and you go, oh yeah, that stuff. And we were very much in the same, you know, hip hop and Amel House. What's the social compilation called? Amel House, hip hop and Amel House. No. I can't remember it, but so there was all these sort of terms for what this thing was. And then Ben Wilmot in The Enemy called it Big Beat, and everyone went, oh yeah, that fits. Because
Britpop and Animal House.
Thank you.
Britpop and Animal House, yeah.
Britpop and Animal House, yes, exactly. Which was so sort of like British stuff like that. We weren't blessed with MCs, or apart from Massive Attack, for example, maybe who had, people to, who could sing or, be on these records. They weren't easy to find. So you always had to find other stuff to put on. And that's why that sample culture happened. So I've, no. I'm going to have to go and briefly feed him.
Okay.
So the thing with the boutique was and again, this is something you only really realize years later, that it was an extension of the House of Love at Norman's, and that sort of eclectic idea that you are at a house party and we got lots of records, and so that was very much the ethos that went with the club, but also it's what was happening up in London as well at the Social, that it was very liberating that you could play whatever you liked. And Norman in particular, I think it was the first time he had a crowd like that, where you could go, oh my God, you could get away with playing this, or I wonder if this would work. And when you're, as a DJ, that's some of the most exciting stuff, that you're prepping your set for that night and you go, I wonder if they'd go with this. And, sure enough, they did. And that was famously when Norm played Sliced Tomatoes, the track that would become Rockefeller Skank, and he just sort of played that, and after some acid house banger, or, and it was, and you could sort of drop Oasis in, or sort of certain other records. So it was definitely sort of liberation and sort of freedom. And Norman in particular really responded to that. And the Concorde, the venue, was perfect for it. It was a very low ceiling. It was like a sort of grotty. I always try and think of a sort of an American equivalent, but sort of like a social club for, what are those ones that used to wear the fezzes?
Like the Elks Club, or
or something like that.
Yeah,
their seaside club, maybe a little less plush, but it was a sort of this sort of weird, funny little venue. And again, especially when everything else was Super Club and Renaissance and all these things. And so we loved that. We loved that idea that we could, we were the antithesis of that, and it was funny and free to, and you might hear something really strange. So
And were you, who was running the big, were you helping book? Were you part of that, or were you playing there, or were you part of running the Big Beat Boutique?
Yeah, I mean, I was part of running it in those sort of first year or two, and Gareth would come and say, we've got this person, should we get this person? So it was, for the first sort of couple of years, it was always me and Norman were the sort of residents, and then we would find someone who would play. So so we had a lot of those people that were on the circuit. So like John Carter, the Chemical Brothers, Death in Vegas, so we had sort of like most people who were making music in that.
So at that time, it's you're DJing, you're making your own artist, your own artist album. You've got the label hat. So what was that like for you during that time? Was it all? You mentioned a lot of it felt pretty organic. It felt pretty natural, and you were just working your ass off. Is that how you look back at that time? Is it all you were able to just, I'm going to work on this. I'm listening to some other people's music. I'm DJing. Did it all just flow?
It did really. I mean, I do look back at that time and go, how the hell did I have time for anything else? Because, with success, and when success comes, it's just also, you're suddenly being asked to DJ in other places. So pretty soon we had this thing of like, we were doing the boutique every other week. Then we were usually playing in London. We were doing Skint on Fridays. We played at the End. We did a couple of other clubs. So the Heavenly Social at Turnmills was the first thing that we used to do. So I used to do that sort of once every couple of months or every few months. I do look back and go, I don't know how I managed to do anything else, but somehow I did. And, and you mix it with suddenly you travel as well, coming over to the States moderately, regularly, 3 or 4, 5 visits to the States a year, sort of going to Japan and Europe. And yeah, it was quite insane. But also everything that drove me, really. I've never thought of myself, you're probably getting this as someone with a lot of drive necessarily, but you're just doing it because, yeah, it's not a job you can sort of like clock off. So I
Right.
would always be like, so every night I would sort of be in the studio till sort of 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, just either making stuff or listening to stuff. So I somehow managed to keep it there. I reiterate how very lucky I was to have JC, who sort of did the business stuff.
Right.
That was very important.
So you signed Low Fidelity All Stars, Bentley Rhythm Ace, Freak Nasty, Cutler Rock, Express
Yeah.
2. Was there
Yeah.
a Skint A&R pipeline, or was a lot of this just you being so out there and meeting people in the clubs and these different places and handshakes? What was that like?
I mean, they would all come from sort of like different things. I mean, Cutler Rock, for example, Lee kind of came with the sort of the office, with the studio, really. So Lee used to he was a very good sort of scratch DJ, and he used to work with Roger Wildchild, and so and he would just make stuff in the studio. He just used the studio, and like 1 in 5 were like, oh, that's really good, can we put that out? There was a concerted effort. 2 of the people you mentioned, Express 2, Freak Nasty, and Dave Clark, were a sort of a concerted. They were rare in that they were a concerted sort of effort on my behalf to sort of not verify. What am I talking about? Expand the gene pool, maybe. Is so we had obviously done well with Norm's album. And it was like, right, let's get who's your favorite house producer? Who's your favorite techno producer? Who's your favorite house producer? Who's your favorite breaks producer? And that was Dave Clark, Express 2, and Freak Nasty. And so we went and asked if they would do, so those were all quite calculated in that we know, and apart from Freak Nasty, I'd known Dave and Express 2 for a long time as well. And of course we were doing very well, so people could, and there was money around, and we could offer good advances as well. So yeah, so they all come from sort of different things. Sometimes it's a mate of a mate who hands you a tape, and as I think we talked about last time, people started sending in music as well, and you started to get demos. Yeah, so people worked out what kind of label we were, and those people found us.
Right. And I don't know if I don't know what your relationship is like, but Martin, Crafty Cuts, talked about wanting to play at the Big Beat and having difficulty getting booked there. And in the crate digging, I mentioned Crafty, and you kind of said said something. So I'm curious, and he didn't speak about it with any bitterness or anything. And obviously Norman signed his record to Southern Fried.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what was your curation like as far as who to book at Big Beat, and was it just like an alignment, of music?
No. Oh, bless him. No. So Martin had a shop at the time. I can't
Mhm.
remember the name of it. But it was a shop in Brighton, and he used to sort of like get some sort of really good, yeah, lots of sort of like good breakbeat stuff and things like that, as you would expect from him. Yeah, I hope I can be candid, and I do love Martin. He
Instant vibes, instant vibes.
instant vibes, that's it, yes. And so sometimes I would go in on my way into work, and he would sort of talk about he would sort of suddenly start telling me what trip hop was, or he would start telling me what certain things were, which I always found quite funny. And this is going to sound horrible, but I don't mean to be. He was just really keen, and a little bit too keen sometimes.
Uh-huh.
And he never quite made the record that I would have gone, yeah, that's really, really good, and I'll sign that. And it just became a bit of a thing, because I've got absolutely no problem with Martin at all. And so it just became sort of like, oh, you're not quite there. And yeah, and we just didn't feel he was quite right for the boutique. I
Right.
think was so, but Martin plays an interesting part, because that's kind of, he started the next wave. Well, not started, but he was part of that next wave, and of where breakbeat would go. And we probably we got to a stage of feeling like breakbeats had sort of not run its course, but was going down somewhere it became slightly cheesy for me, I felt. And there was a lot of sort of big beat opportunists
Yeah.
going around, which is what you always get with any sound. Um, so yeah, so we probably reacted a bit. I probably reacted a bit against that, and sort of went houseier, because I had always I had been a house DJ when I started. So yeah, so I think we kind of dropped the breakbeats, and they ran with them.
Right,
Sort of
right. Because
Martin
then
and
you had Finger Lickin', Lot
yeah,
49,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I think if Justin had said in listening to the Freestylers Essential Mix, and Aston said the term, he talked about it was quite urban. It was a quite urban sound, and conscious that
yeah,
he's a white guy. And Norman actually said the same thing about how the sampler kind of democratized that sound. All of a
yeah,
sudden, you don't have to be a singer, or I'm just going to sample this, and you can pull in those influences. So
yeah,
all of these, those of us at kids that were listening to that music when they were young, of course, the influences come out.
yeah.
So were there, I talked to Simon Shackleton as well, and so it seems like there was kind of like, I don't know, not political, but just different alignments. Like Lot 49 kind of had their own sound, and Meet Katie kind of had that dark, 4/4 break sound, and Simon, Elite Force had that kind of grindy at times. And
Yeah.
so was there, I don't know what my question is here. Was there competition, collaboration? Did you guys really think about, did you think about much what Finger Licking was doing, or were you just concentrated with your own sound and your own direction?
He- I would always always have a few of their records in my box. I do just need to say that I invented new school breaks with my track Go Off, which is, I'm still waiting for the blue plaque to come back about that.
I wanted to ask about New School Break. So what year was
Yeah.
that?
So when was that? That was Go Off. It was 99, maybe.
Okay.
99. Yeah, it was just it was sort of my attempt. There's a bit of Kevin Saunderson in there. There's a bit of breakbeat. Yeah, I mainly say this to annoy Tayo Papula, who is my friend, who had Mob Records. He used to play at that a quite seminal breaks night, which now typically I can't remember the name of, but it was him and Adam and yeah, I'm hoping, I'm hoping that will come to me. But yeah, so it was definitely a bit of a split. I think certain people liked the certain people sort of preferred it bassier and dubbier and less event filled, which was very
Mhm.
much what Norman did, and it was trebly and quite gnarly in the sound. And if you listen to a lot of that other stuff, and especially stuff that mutated from drum and bass, it was deeper and smoother and less zany. And I think that
Mhm.
was one of the elements of Big Beat, because Big Beat was this sort of large, catch-all term. For some people, Big Beat meant zany, and so there were always going to be, and you can't do that for long. That
Yeah.
sort of music, that intensity can get a bit tiresome. So people start looking for other things. So people wanted, who probably were into sort of dubbier stuff, sounds, as I just said. So you get those elements of techno and yeah. I mean, my favorite breakbeat track is probably the Coma and Bones mix of Smoke Machine by Express 2,
Yeah.
which is stunning record. So yeah, I liked some of that. I didn't like all of it, and as that was sort of going on, I think there was a sort of a slight parting of the
Mhm.
waves. And I remember doing my first tour in Australia, and a couple of times I'd be picked up from the airport, and they'd go, and I'd say, and they go, "So you're going to play, going to play some breaks tonight?" And it's like, "Well, yeah, but it is all right to play some house, isn't it?" And
Yeah.
there would just be this silence. Well, maybe you could maybe have one, maybe one or two. And it's like, oh, crikey. And there was a part of that sort of breakbeat crowd. Some of them got quite militant.
Yeah.
And I always felt that was like, oh, just as well, as much as, we'd got used to not having to hear one type of sound all the way through.
Yeah.
They were like, right, it's
So,
breakbeat from doors open to doors closed. And it was like,
I
yeah.
So, what was it like for you coming up with Skint Records? And you talked about the visual aspect and the logos and the record sleeves and putting so much of yourself into it. What was that like watching Fatboy Slim turn into one of the biggest DJs, if not the biggest DJ on the planet?
Uh, well, it was amazing. It was amazing. It's funny. I think Norm, again, rewind to me being the youngest of five, and I had showing off beaten out of me when you're the youngest by quite a way. So I was very much of that. I'm quite happy for no one to look at me when I'm DJing. Norm has always been a performer. He loves being up on stage. And what made those sets early on so special was that he was more fucked up than the crowd. And the connection with them was like, are you coming with me on this journey? Because it's going to be great. And they were going, fuck yeah, I'm in. And he was amazing at that. And he had the showmanship. And I was really very comfortable. The set I've probably done the most in my life is warming up for Norm, and I'd love it. And I've always enjoyed that. And I take it to a point and then go, there you go, Norm. I did used to have this joke that I would sometimes be playing, and I'd be doing a mix, and it would be going quite well, and it would be go, and then you'd hear this enormous cheering and going, oh, great, yeah, they're loving this. And then, of course, it's Norm's just sort of, Norm's just come up behind me, or Norm's come on stage. So yeah, I mean, it was great. It was great, and it all helped with the records as well. Yeah, so I was delighted, and I love the fact that he's still, the stuff he can still do is just ludicrous. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. Coachella, he absolutely slayed it. That was
Did
brilliant.
he? Right? Yeah, I can imagine. So yeah,
Showing a lot of younger DJs how to really do it. It
yeah,
wasn't just about the drops and the big bass. It's just the whole fusing it all together.
yeah.
So you started off with 800 copies of Santa Cruz sold. Fat Boy's first album, You've Come a Long Way, Baby. Actually, was that the first one? Or was that the second one? What goes to number
No,
one? Is that the
yeah.
second one?
Better
Uh,
Living Through Chemistry was the first.
right. Okay. So You've Come a Long Way, Baby goes to number one. What was that like for you behind the desk as Skint Records owner?
It was a bit insane. I was speaking to we had one of our old Skintonians lunches, and I was speaking to Andy Mack, who used to work with us at the label, was one of the first people we got in. And he reminded me of there was a time when we were doing one of the big planning meetings up in London where Norman's management were. And so people from the distributors, people from Sony, people from press, everyone involved, probably about 25 people around the table. And we were talking and they were just going, okay, so we've sold 70,000 albums this week. We're repressing again. We're going to press another sort of 200,000. We've done this here, with this there. And apparently Gary had to stop them and just laugh and go, this is amazing. This is, this is incredible. And what a sort of a joyous time it was. So, yeah, I mean, I sometimes look back and go, I just wish I could have enjoyed it more. Sometimes you're just so sort of caught up in, right, what's going next? What are we doing here? Is we doing this right? You're so caught up in it all. Sometimes you look back and go, did I really, was that, I found an old notebook and like I had a bit of sort of diary bit and you go, did I really do that and then go to that and then do that? And it might be the Brits, or it might be going to award shows, or it might be playing in Tokyo, or, just all these things that you were just so lucky to have the opportunity to do. And yeah, I just sometimes I just sort of think, oh, I wish because there is a big amount of stress comes when this label is suddenly, oh my God, we look what we've become, and that was never the intention. And so there is a sort of a bit of stress there when which it wasn't why I got into it, but we were into it, so we had to deal with it.
So you talked a little already about your own recognition of moving on with the sound. And Gemstone, in our episode with him, he said that by about 2005-06, breaks had become too genre specific. The thing that gave them freedom had become a cage. And you left Skint around that time, I believe, 2006. Were you having that same feeling and the pressure?
Yeah, I think so. Around, so in 2000, in 2005, I'd moved to Paris and I was having my sabbatical there. And so more of my friends were making what became, and this was quite a good thing for me as well, when my friends got a equally bad name, but they were sort of classed as Electroclash.
Yeah.
Musically, that was more where I felt comfortable. And there was when I went and lived in Paris and was hanging out with, and I was very lucky to be hanging out with the Ed Bang a lot in their sort of like golden period at the beginning of their journey. The first 2 years of Skin and the Boutique were brilliant because every night, all of us went. All of us went to that party, all of us played, and it was a collective feeling. And the same happened at Ed Banger. They would do a party, all the crew turned up, and then when you get success and someone has to play somewhere else or someone's off to playing in Sheffield that night or something like that. So I find that bit early on when nothing's defined, the most exciting. And so I turned up, and so you'd have like Mehdi, Xavier and Gaspar, Pedro as well, Sebastian, and they would all play different stuff, and there was a few sort of like French hip hop records. They would play house, they would play disco, and it was that liberated feeling of play what you like. There's this kind of underlying sound, which was that distorted Justice sort of like kind of gnarly sound. And so that was more where I was leaning towards. I do remember we got Justice to remix Fatboy Slim. The difficult fourth album, Don't Let the Man Get You Down, which is where it all kind of started to fall apart. But there was a track and they did a remix for us. And I played it to JC, and we were in my office and just had it on really, really loud. They just delivered it. And we both went, Jesus Christ, this is so exciting. And this is the future. And these like two French kids have just changed it all. And it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. And I think, after that, I also have that in terms of sort of seeing those times. I remember when Losing My Edge came out by LCD Sound System, and I remember going, I had missed the record. I heard it on the radio, and it used to be that I was so on everything, and it was like, why haven't I heard this? What's going on? Why am I missing this? And and obviously the lyrics to Losing My Edge is where he's talking about I'm there's cooler kids coming in and they're better dressed, and this is what we were going through. And in my head, I was going, there's all these really cool people coming through. I'd met Dave and Steph, Diwali. I'd been hanging out with Errol a lot. I've been going to Trash, and I found all those things really exciting and really interesting, and much more kind of where I would have liked to have steered the label. But we couldn't really do it. Yeah.
So you mentioned this in Crate Digging that your second album, which was, you mentioned it kind of a difficult one, and then now you just mentioned Fatboy's fourth album.
Yeah.
What was going on? Tell me more, I guess, about what were the difficulties you were facing.
Well, so with Norman's, and he addresses this in the book, his sort of big book, It Ain't Over Till the Fat Boy Sings.
I tried to buy one and totally sold out as far as I can find.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. Well, he talks about, and it was the first time, and this, because we're men, we never sort of spoke about these things. Yeah, the fourth album was really hard work, and there was a lot of pressure. We were getting a lot of pressure from, it wasn't just us anymore, it was Sony. Sony worldwide were all going, right, when's the next one? What's the next, big hit? And I think it was a time, I'd always had this thing that Norman sometimes struggled with second albums because he it was hard to chase. Norman is better just going, right, I've made this. And you look back at his career, Freak Power with Turn On Tune in Cop Out. There you go. There's a brilliant record. I think it went to #1 in the UK. And here's the rest of an album, and it's a good solid album. And then they go to do the second one, and he goes, oh God, right. How did I do it that first time? And it was all instinct. And he, Beats International was similar. And so I always think Norman works so much better instinctively when he's not trying to make a record for radio, when he's not trying to make a hit. And I think you'll find a lot of artists are like that. And so that golden period when he was making stuff for us, it was all stuff he wanted to play at the boutique. So, Right Here, Right Now, Praise You, Rockefeller Skank, they're all records that he would play at the boutique, and that's what he made them for.
Mm-hmm.
And, he would go in on a Sunday after our heavy night and just make, just sorry to put this in, but shit gold, basically. Sorry for that slightly disturbing image. But what we did, so we deliberately didn't not suggest to him that Better Living Through Chemistry was an album, but just a collection of stuff. Then we had You Come a Long Way Baby, which was just golden. And then halfway between The Gutter and the Stars, I actually think is a better album, so we did that, and I think that was a great record. In hindsight, we shouldn't have gone with Bird of Prey as the first single. We should have gone with Star 69 and not cared about the radio. And so we got to 4, and he was working a lot, and he was playing all over the world. And for the first time, it didn't come naturally. And for the first time, I was having to send tracks back and go, no, I'm not feeling this. It was hard work. That was the first time we'd ever had that. I think I'd maybe turned down 1 track in all the previous years. And this was the first time that it was a struggle. I think Norm was struggling. He had his own demons as well to sort of deal with his drinking. And so, it was hard. And it sort of did get to us a bit. I didn't like that album. And so that was hard because we were all just, everything came from us being really good friends and having a laugh and it being fun and going, oh my God, can you believe we're getting away with this? And then 4th album, it's like, we haven't quite got enough for that next one. So it was hard for me. And that was kind of the beginning and the end for me at Skint as well. It just wasn't so much fun.
How difficult was that to walk away from essentially what was your baby?
Very difficult. And letting go was always sort of quite difficult. And then I went to France, and it was, I just sort of found it quite liberating. Again, I don't know how many times I've said liberating, but that's what it felt like, to sort of get away from it and go, oh, you don't have to worry.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, and liberating does seem to be a running theme.
Yes.
After Skint, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of these, because I love this list.
Yeah.
So you were involved in a Michelin-starred restaurant with your brothers, a Channel 4 cartoon about a hip-hop obsessed zebra, an Arsenal podcast with Alan Davies, wine writing for Noble Rot, and a Vice film.
Yes. Yes. And I did quite a lot. And I tried to write scripts as well. So I taught myself how to
TV, movies?
Yeah, TV. So sort of comedy dramas, which funnily enough, I wasn't pushy enough, and I got close, and I got quite close with things, but never enough that last bit to sort of actually make something happen. But ironically, I sent the script for one of my things to someone this last week, and they really like it. So we'll see if that side of me ever comes out. So yeah, I also, it was the first time I wasn't on top of everything in dance music, and I got into Van Morrison, I got into Joni Mitchell. I'd always been told anyone with sort of punk connections in their musical history is told that 1968 to 75 was this barren wasteland, and it was just hippies and, you know, hippies playing guitar. And I hadn't realized Joni Mitchell and Van Morrison were making stunning records. It was the Rolling Stones' best period as well, in my opinion. So I was doing a lot of that and getting better at playing guitar. I was very lucky to have that opportunity to not do much. Not, you know, but just do what I wanted and try and do these things. So, yeah.
And BMG bought Skin in 2014, and you come back as creative director in 2019, and said you felt revived, refreshed, and free of cynicism. So, was the cynicism about that business and the pressure, or what was that about? And was it that refreshing, like you said, you had time enough to away from, you could just enjoy music again?
Yes. I think the way you listen to music, or the way I did listen to music, was different. And that you would go, okay, right, what would we do with this? How many would we press? Who would we get to send it out? Who could we get to remix it? Rather than going, oh my God, have you heard this? This is wonderful. And so that business side of it does take over, I feel, and overwhelm you. Yeah, and I just think the business, and especially as the period of time we were in the business, we sort of traversed that sort of move from analog to digital. And the music industry went through this sort of like headless chickens stage. If it didn't know what to do about digital streaming, piracy, didn't know what to do with Napster. The idea was, right, well, let's sue everyone. And then you have to play a lot of games as well, and some of them are shit games, and you don't want to play. and it's just like, oh, this is, you sort of start to see it for what it is, and you know that wide-eyed excitement the first time you go to the Brit Awards, or you go to an award ceremony, is, you know, great. And then when it becomes a bit of a chore, which sounds ridiculous, but you know, yeah, those little things, it wasn't my sort of be all and end all. And I just found myself very much not trapped. Trapped is a bit over dramatic, but yeah, that was the world we inhabited. And it just, it became a bit tiresome.
If you mentioned the one thing, you know, which was you wish you could have maybe even enjoyed it a little bit more at the time. Knowing what you know now, if you could, you know, hop back in the time machine, is there anything else you would have done differently as label head?
I would have bought a house in London. I would have bought a London pied-à-terre and probably lived off that. I bought a lot more property. For all the good bits, no. I think there is a sort of, there's something about that kind of, we're making this up as we go along. We're on this journey. I liked the snotty little brother upstart sort of image that we had as a label. When you're trying to be a bit annoying to people, I enjoyed that we annoyed purists, for example, you know, and all those things. There's only so long that can last until you're part of the establishment. So I mean, one thing I really wish we could have done is, I look at Excel and I look at Ninja Tune and what they both did and how XL managed to change itself from, from Charlie Says by The Prodigy being a rave label to putting out Badly Drawn Boy, The White Stripes, and then Adele and Wiley and Dizzy Rascal. Yeah, sorry, I won't keep listing all their songs, but, albums. But that I wish we could have done. And I look back and I go, I'm good friends with one of the A&R people from XL now at that time, and he was sort of like would talk about their gradual change. So without Badly Drawn Boy, they wouldn't have got the White Stripes, for example, and so it's that is probably my biggest regret, that we needed to mutate and we needed to evolve, and for whatever reason it didn't quite happen. And I did try. We signed a couple of really good records by the Ralph Band, who are this sort of quirky music. I still find it a struggle to describe what they are. And a band called Lucky Jim as well, that we put out. We all loved the record, but it didn't quite work on Fatboy Slim's label, because that's what we were always known for, I think. So that's so apart from Property and not being able to change quite, those are the two regrets, I'd say.
And being part of Skint still to this day, what's the future look like in that regard?
I'm not there anymore.
Oh, no, you are gone. Okay. I thought you were still part of the creative team.
No. So I went back. I redesigned the logo. I signed Rasheen Murphy. I signed Lou Hayter. I signed Emperor Machine. So we did some really good things. We also signed Museum of Love, which was Pat, the drummer from LCD Sound System. And I love that album. Absolutely love it. And then lockdown happened and COVID and all of that. And then, for example, Rasheen Murphy had a good lockdown. She was able to sort of engage with people, and she was doing live streams. And and then sort of Museum of Love suffered from it because they were a really good live band. So we just got to a stage, and then after a few years, it was becoming obvious that BMG wanted something else from my view of it. I felt that you create a place I wanted to create a place where if you're the next LCD Sound System or you're the next Justice, that you would consider us as your label, because we do left field dance music very well. And that was kind of what I was trying to create, but we didn't quite get there. And I had always had Vicious Charm as a fallback. I'd always kind of knew that I would do my own label again and have complete autonomy. And so that's what I'm doing now. I'm running Vicious Charm.
And what's next what do you see for the future there?
Well, one quick thing on Vicious Charm is that the tagline is "We'll know it when we hear it," in a deliberate attempt to not get too sort of defined and classified. So the future is really exciting. We've had the Crooked Man album out earlier this year, which has gone really, really well. Weird, quirky, left field, predominantly house, but not exclusively. I just adore Crooked Man's records. And so we've done that. We've done an album by E.R. Thorpe, who's a Nottingham folk singer, and she's made this great record. But the most exciting thing is Jim, whose second album we are just starting out on. And Jim is part of Crazy P. He's run Bass Jam, and he was our first release, our first album, and he's just finished his second one, and it's beautiful, and I really hope we sell some. Because it's a very different game. It's a very different world.
Yeah.
I tell you that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you, Damien. This has been a very illuminating interview. I did ask you at the end of Crate Digging for a referral. Do we have any news? I'd like to continue these
Yeah.
stories. So, who are you nominating for the next guest?
Well, that's a tricky one. I mean, only because he's sort of probably my best friend is Tayo Papula of Mob Records. Because I'll be seeing him tomorrow. I mean, I think I mean, if you could get Errol Alkan is, he sort of, okay, so I've got one more little story, if that's all right.
Sure.
So at the Big Beach Boutique, which was the event on Brighton Beach to 250,000 people. It was 2002 in the summer. We had just come back from Japan. We had done a tour out there for the World Cup, and we were playing on, to 250,000 people on Brighton Beach. And I was just going, we can't go any bigger. This has to be it. This is we've reached the pinnacle. And that was the day. So I got off stage, and in my dressing room were Dave and Steph Diwali, who are Soulwax, Too Many DJs, and Errol. And Errol I had known. It was the first time I met Dave and Steph. And they were playing at the official boutique after party at the Concord too. So they were playing. They had taken over. For me, that was the moment that the sort of baton was passed to the next generation. And I really felt that because, both Soulwax and Errol Alkan are incredibly talented people who have taken the game on to other levels, so for me, I could listen to Errol and Dave and Steph talk about music for a very long time. So
All
there
right.
you go.
All right. Well, I might ask for some help in connecting
Yes,
a
sure.
well-made referral. All right. Well, thank you, Damien. It's been a great interview, and looking forward to when this comes out.
Yes. Well, let me know. I hope I didn't ramble too much. Yes.
Just the right.
Okay, good. I better get back to my needy cat. So I'm going to bid you farewell and sort your room out when you get a chance as well. Okay.
I will.
Okay.